Episode 8. Hello, thanks for tuning in to this special Wednesday night episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host for the show. If you've listened to past episodes, you've noticed I usually only bring on eyewitnesses to talk about Dogman encounters they've had. For tonight's special show and future special shows yet to come, I'm going to break that trend. So that you know, Friday's show is going to air on time at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Mark Reynolds is going to be my guest, and he's going to be talking about multiple Dogman encounters he's had over the years. It's a really good show you're not going to want to miss. For tonight's show, our guest is Jack Cary. Jack's the founder and director of the Paranormal Intelligence Agency. He's also a field researcher for the Crypto Four Corners crew. Jack's got a lot of good information to share about dogmen, as well as other cryptids, but one of the biggest reasons why I asked Jack if he'd come on the show is the fact that he enjoys investigating dogman encounters more than any other type of cryptid encounter. The man's obviously got really good taste in his cryptids. Jack, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you very much for having me, Vic.
For starters, Jack, please tell us about yourself and how you got started into investigating cryptids.
My name is Jack Cary, and I'm the founder and current director of a paranormal research organization known as the Paranormal Intelligence Agency. And we do have a website where we publish a lot of our research. I got into the investigation of cryptid animals, a lot like many other cryptozoologists, through the Bigfoot phenomenon, soon discovering thereafter that there were many other cryptid animals that also had a body of evidence suggesting that they were real and were also somewhat more interesting than even the Sasquatch creatures, the Dogmen being one of those cryptids.
My kind of investigator, I like that.
As a child, I grew up very close to Muddy Boggy Creek and not far from Falk, Arkansas. And back in those days, there was the tale of the Falk monster, and you had the seminal movie come out, Muddy Boggy Creek, which affected me greatly as a child because I was so close to all of those sightings of Sasquatch. And I grew up with a Native American grandfather who also told me of their existence. So from a very early age, I was interested in cryptid animals, and that only grew and grew as I got older and began to actually undertake a lot of investigations myself.
You did have a nice early start then.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You and your research team are based in the Crypto Four Corners area. Could you, for our listeners, please tell us about that area, the topography, anything you could share?
Absolutely. I am a member of Crypto Four Corners that was founded by a great man named J.C. Johnson, who is my mentor as far as cryptozoology matters go. And the Four Corners area has a very, very long history of anomalous paranormal activity, and that includes a very heightened percentage of eyewitness accounts of cryptid animals. These animals range a wide variety, anything from the usual Sasquatch encounter to things as exotic as very large reptiles, at least the size of Komodo dragons, have been reported there, including J.C. Johnson's son, who actually had an eyewitness encounter with one of them. There are things exotic as centaurs being reported there on Indian reservations. So you have in the Four Corners an area that is not only cloaked in historical mystery and mysticism, in a place where every ancient southwestern Native American tribe holds sacred, but you also have a nonstop array of paranormal activity, all occurring within a very relatively small geographic vicinity. And that in itself makes it a very unique area around the United States. One of my favorite places on Earth is the San Luis Valley, which has been the the topic of many a paranormal book, some written by Chris O'Brien, the Mysterious Valley books, and that's just really to the north of the Four Corners, and that's a place that the Native American tribes, including the Navajo, hold extremely sacred. They believe that, one of their holiest mountains, which is Mount Blanca there at the southern edge of the valley, is their holiest mountain. And so you have a lot of indigenous belief that that area is magical, is sacred, that there's something special and unusual about it, and the nonstop paranormal phenomena that's reported there adds to that credibility, in my opinion. So.
Is that the valley where they say the deeper into that valley you go, the stranger the cryptids are and the more frequent your encounters become?
You better believe it. And a lot of them believe that it is what they call a vortex area today. Jonathan Keel referred to these areas as window areas where he believed there was a momentary, from time to time things just line up right and you can have a momentary interaction between dimensions. And that there are creatures on these other dimensions that are able to cross over into this reality in a corporal way, leave physical evidence, and then pass back into this other dimension, sort of get sucked back into it when the right alignment kind of goes back out of alignment again. And he believed that was the reason why you had such a vast array of different paranormal phenomena all reported in these different geographic areas, pretty much all clustered in a singular area. And the San Luis Valley is one of those major vortex areas. There's nonstop reported cryptid animals there. In fact, my wife even had a sighting there of a cryptid animal. We still have no idea of what it was. I left the campsite one afternoon to go into the little town of Crestone and get some supplies. And when I came back, she was up on the picnic table with our two very large dogs standing up, and claimed that she had seen a creature that looked very much like a ground sloth slithering across the road and into this little creek hollow that was near our campsite. And she wouldn't even sleep in the tent that night, had to sleep in the car. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. And she's not the only one that has seen something that appears to be like a ground sloth there. So, and they've also got, of course, the Sasquatch sightings are nonstop up there, going way back to the silver mining days of that valley, and the miners back then gave the creature the nickname Bogie. I've tried to research the origin of that name forever and not been able to come up with where they got that nickname. But
it's obvious, Jack, that you've been exposed for quite some time now to a lot of different types of cryptids. I know that dogmen, investigating dogmen, is your passion. Dogmen are your favorite cryptid to study. Why is it, when you look at all the different cryptids you could have focused on, what is it about dogmen that drew you to them more than any other kind of cryptid?
Well, I was like everybody else in the cryptozoological community, being entranced with the idea that we were about to actually prove the existence of Sasquatch, and I can tell you that is about to be proven. So I don't really consider that a mystery anymore. But it was in the pursuit of researching Sasquatch that I came across Dogmen, and I have to tell you, I was quite skeptical in the beginning that these people were, in fact, seeing a dog-headed, upright walking creature. I could not wrap my head around that, even though I was exposed to nonstop paranormal activity and cases that we were going out on, including bizarre animal mutilation cases and things like that. The idea that you could have what amounts to an evolutionary leap within a canine species that would allow it to develop biologically into a apex predator, able to walk upright and hunt in that kind of a position, is something that not only flies in the face of known biological science, but is disturbing on a deep level, on a way that a creature like Sasquatch isn't. I mean, after all, we have biological explanations for a creature like Sasquatch. We don't have a biological explanation for a creature like a dogman. And when you sort of combine that with other mysteries that we've been researching, including the many, many missing people in our national park system that have been chronicled by David Paulides of the Missing 411 books and the Canada America Missing Project, you begin to suspect that there is an unknown apex predator somehow responsible for those missing people. At least I do. And right now, my number one suspect are the Dogmen. There was a hiker who was gashed open by the fang of a Dogman as he ran by. And there have been a few other cases where the Dogmen seem extremely aggressive towards human beings. A group of 5 teenagers in Milwaukee one night had to run desperately from a Dogman. And the guy that was in last place, as they were running away, got his shirt ripped by the claws of a Dogman. It got that close. So we know it was intending harm. So I find that fascinating that you do have all of these cases of missing people. They don't appear to be Sasquatch responsible for it, in my opinion, because we've known about them for a very long time, and yet these missing person cases are relatively new, and they seem to coincide with a surgence in Dogman sightings.
One point that comes to mind, Jack, because of what you just said, I want to point out, if you're thinking about going out into the wilderness and you're worried about possibly getting jumped by a Dogman, you don't have to worry about being faster than the Dogman if you're in a group. Just make sure you're not the slowest person.
That's exactly right. Don't be the slow one.
In your group. That's right. You've got nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
funny.
Well, after I came across the work of a well-known Sasquatch researcher, and he actually had captured what appeared to be both video and stills of not a Sasquatch, but of a Dogman. His name's Scott Carpenter, and your viewers can look him up. He's got some fascinating video. He was out researching Sasquatches and quite by accident came across a Dogman. And he knew it wasn't a Sasquatch and didn't know what in the heck he was looking at or what he had gotten a picture of. And on further analysis of the video, even captured both eye and ear movement of the creature. Now, when I saw that, I knew instantly that we had something that was not a Sasquatch, but that could represent a very real and present danger to anyone going into the woods. I mean, you possibly have a vicious apex predator. It certainly has the biological capability of ripping a human to shreds. Whether or not that's ever happened, we don't know. But it could be the reason why we never hear about somebody being attacked viciously is because they just don't survive the attack. We do have plenty of people that have gone missing never to be found again in our national park system.
Of all the people that have disappeared, it really does make you wonder if Dogmen weren't at the base of at least a percentage of those cases. Can you imagine a worse way of going out compared to that? That's just horrible.
Oh yeah, there is no more. In my mind, there would be no more horrifying encounter than to have a face-to-face encounter with a Dogman and for it to end your life. That would just be absolutely horrific. And I just don't wonder if these things are a true biological creature, if they are breeding, if they are feeding in the wilds of North America. Would they see a lone human being as a food source? And that's something that, hopefully ongoing research will tell us.
That's a chilling thought. From your past statements, I don't want to come to conclusions. I want to ask you about this instead, just so I'm clear. It sounds to me like you look at Sasquatch as being a much more benign type of creature than Dogmen. Am I hearing you correct on that?
I do, and the reason why I have come to that conclusion is because I have read literally thousands of Sasquatch encounters, and although there have been a handful of cases where the creatures seem to exhibit aggressive behavior, it doesn't seem like they're too interested in feeding off of a human. They just want to run you off because they don't want you near their clan or their family or their hunting spot or whatever. And my mentor, J.C. Johnson, has taught me that, in fact, they have proven with the DNA samples they were able to obtain, over 100 samples, that these things do, in fact, have some human DNA. It seems to stretch back 15,000 years ago to a point where an unknown hominid interbred with archaic human females and produced this line. But yeah, I believe them to be at least benevolent if they're not cornered or messed with in a way that the dogmen may not be.
Back to the whole dogmen and how dangerous they might be topic, Jack. What's the most unnerving encounter you've investigated from an eyewitness?
The most unnerving, I've not had an actual person come up to me other than a witness who approached me and had a childhood experience and said that as a child in New Mexico, his family lived in a remote property outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he claimed, and this was a guy that, from what I could tell, had no knowledge of any other paranormal activity, but he claimed that as a child on this property, his family would regularly take leftovers from the dinner table out to a rock outcropping on this remote ranch property and lay it out, and that a family of what he called dog-faced people would come out and feed off of it. Now, I find that fascinating because this happened during his childhood. He didn't seem to have any knowledge of modern-day dogmen sightings or anything like that. Actually seemed quite surprised when I brought up the topic of modern-day dogman sightings. So it's been one of those things that's been forever in my mind, and we've been trying to identify that exact property where he grew up so that we could go out and examine that rock outcropping. Another case that I recently examined came into Phantoms and Monsters, and it happened in South Dakota. Very remote area. I drove out to the sighting spot, found the exact spot, and was able to take pictures of the surrounding topography and determine that it matched a pattern that we've been able to identify with all dogman sightings. Something that we recognize straight on, that Linda Godfrey has published even about, talking about how in every single dogman sighting you have all of the following. You have either Indian mounds or relics somewhere nearby, a Native American presence. You have a surrounding forest area, a habituation area. You have cornfields present always, and you have water. And every single one of the dogman sightings that have been chronicled, at least 3 of those 4 things are found in the eyewitness area. That led me into the next thing I'd like to discuss, which is my origin hypothesis of dogmen. Now, being in the P.I.A., I've been able to have contact with a forensic geologist who has his own TV show on History Channel called America Unearthed. You may have seen it. His name is Scott Wolters.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, he doesn't examine paranormal stuff, but he has been able to, I think, shed a light on a lot of historical mysteries and is somewhat rewriting American history. But I've been able to assist him on a couple of different topics he was investigating in and provide him with some information that he was missing on those topics. And one day I was watching TV, and sure enough, there was Scott, and he had a new episode, and they were going to investigate some rock pyramids in Rock Lake, Wisconsin. Underwater pyramids that are supposed to exist in a lake in Wisconsin. Well, right away, the word Wisconsin brought up, in my mind, the dogman sighting, right? And not long into the program, he has on an expert named Dr. Robert Rodriguez. And this guy is an expert in the ancient history of the Aztec people. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. Well, it come to find out that in this area near Rock Lake is what's called Aztalan State Park, spelled almost like Aztec. Aztalan, Aztalan State Park. And it is believed, because they found both aerial mounds and step pyramids, earthen step pyramids in the state park, the very first pioneers that came across it believed it to be identical to the step pyramids found of the Aztecs in Mexico. So they named it after the Aztecs and believed that this was probably where they came from. Well, Dr. Robert Rodriguez is an Aztec specialist and a specialist in corn, an expert in corn. And come to find out, according to him, when he approached the Aztec elders and began to study their origin mythology, they all claimed that they came from a place in the extreme north, far north of Mexico, they said, and that the key to finding their origins was to follow the corn. Now, corn is sacred to the Aztecs beyond all other plants, and the thing about corn is that it doesn't grow wild. Corn must be tended by human hands. And as far as they're able to tell, it originated in southern Mexico about 7,000 years ago and came to North America 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. Now, archaeologists believe that these earthen pyramids near Rock Lake were actually created by what they call the Mississippian culture. There is reason to believe now, through Dr. Robert Rodriguez's research, that the Mississippian culture, which stretched all the way from Canada down to the Gulf of Mexico, ended up becoming the Aztec people. Now, the Aztec people had a long-standing prophecy, and their original tribal leader had a vision, and his vision was that the tribe should travel south from their place of origin till they came across an eagle eating a snake or a serpent on top of a barbed tree. And that is symbolism that you can find on the Mexican flag even to this day. That is the symbolism of the Aztec people. They believed that from this northern location, they traveled to where they reside today in southern Mexico, but that along the way, there were many stops. And Dr. Robert Rodriguez has gone to great lengths, basically proving that these Aztec people came from the Wisconsin, Michigan area. Some of the information that he provides is that a lot of the words between the Aztecs and those northern Indian tribes are the same. For instance, the word Michigan is the same as the word moccasin in Aztec. There are all kinds of different words that seem to share a common origin, and that origin is in the north. What's very interesting to me is that he came across a 300-year map tradition where every single map before the Treaty of Hidalgo was signed in 1847 depicted the Aztec people as originating in North America. Now, the very last map that he found was an actual map right before the treaty was signed, and it depicted the Aztec people as coming from the Four Corners area. Now, that's fascinating, given that the Four Corners area is where tons of Dogman sightings and other cryptid sightings have occurred. But he believed that he had also traced them back to the Great Salt Lake and then back north into the Wisconsin and Michigan areas. Now, when I heard Aztec and I heard pyramid and I heard corn, I thought, in Wisconsin, I thought immediately the thing that popped into my head, what is the likelihood that the Aztec people had a dog-headed deity and worshiped that deity? And so the very first thing I did was I went over and to my computer and I looked up dog-headed deities of the Aztec, and lo and behold, a deity popped up, and his name is Xolotl, spelled Xolotl. And just like Anubis in the Egyptian culture, he was the god of the underworld. Now, a lot of people believe that the Aztecs came out of the Mississippian culture, and they know for a fact that the Mississippian culture practiced ritualistic cannibalism, something that the Aztecs also later practiced in the form of human sacrifice. What are the odds that we have a connection to a Native American tribe that worships a dog-headed man god, that holds sacred corn, that came from the exact area that we consider ground zero for man-dog sightings, that followed a migratory path into South America that also seems to overlay perfectly the Dogman sightings that have taken place all the way from as far north as Canada down into South America. You don't get as many on either coast, but that central area right there, which is the area they would have migrated through, is the area where you have most of the Dogman sites. Even the Cherokee tribe, which is thought to have been heavily influenced by the Mississippian people, have their own term. They call it Hatek Ofi, spelled H-A-T-T-A-K-O-F-I, and it literally means man dog. And so I began to think to myself, what are we looking at here? Did these Native American peoples actually come across this creature in the wild that long ago and then deified it and began to worship it because it was such a strong creature? Or are we looking at somehow a manifestation of an etheric spiritual entity caused by thousands of years of worship of this creature? And that's the seminal question I began to ask myself. And this is where I really came across something interesting, which I'll relay to your audience, having to do with one of the very first highly documented sightings. Happened in 1936 at the St. Coletta School for Exceptional Children in Wisconsin. This was a school that housed troubled children, and there was a man there named Mark Shackelford who worked as a security guard for a number of years. The story was later relayed by his son, who actually told it to a news reporter. But when he was the guard at the St. Coletta School in Wisconsin, one night he claims that behind the main building, an Indian burial mound, he saw a dog-man creature with a wolf head, long human-like hands and claws, on its knees, digging furiously into this mound. Now, he stood there and he looked at it for a long time, and the thing eventually fled into the night. The next night, he thinks to himself, man, I'm going to arm myself with a big, heavy flashlight and go do my rounds, and this time I'll get a good look. If I see anything, I'll get a good look at it, and I know I won't be crazy. So he takes the flashlight, and he finds it in the exact same spot, sticking in the exact same mound. He's able to shine the light right on it and get a great look at this thing. He's able to describe the yellow eye shine, which is described non-stop eyewitnesses, which matches perfectly the biology of a canine, which does have yellow eye shine. But in his case, where it differs from all of the other cases that have ever been chronicled, he claims that the creature stood up, looked at him, and spoke a word. And that word was chronicled by Linda Godfrey as Gu-da-ra. Now, Gu-da-ra, if you break that down into its syllables, could be a place of ancient Judea. There is a place called Gadara, which was an ancient place in Judea. But in our research, what we came across was not Gudara, but a Spanish word, a word derived from Spanish and Mexican origins, and that word was Qdara, spelled Q-U-E-D-A-R-A. And Qdara actually means to stay, to keep still, don't move. Now, it's interesting that this thing spoke this word right before it turned and walked off. Spoke a Spanish origin word in an area that was only 6 miles from the Aztlan State Park, where recently the Aztecs originated.
It's obvious you've put an extensive amount of research into the topic of dogmen. You seem to be by far the most highly motivated researcher in that group to investigate these cases. Whenever a report comes in of a dogman encounter in that whole area, I take it, are you the researcher that they hand that case to? Are you the go-to guy for cases like that to research them?
Well, with Crypto Four Corners, we kind of approach it as a team always. Every member in that team has different strengths, and we play to those strengths. And one of my strengths is the actual historical research behind the mystery, hoping that it'll give us glimpses into the character and nature of the behavior patterns so that we can actually use that information as actionable intelligence and go out into the field and capture the evidence that we're looking for. Because, we're not out there for fun, and nobody pays you to be a monster hunter. Nobody's going to pay you to go out and collect evidence that's going to end up shattering their belief system. So there's no money in it at all. We consider it to be a public service in that we're trying to educate people to the possible dangers of these phenomena and that they do in fact exist. And our number one goal is to document them in such a way that it is irrefutable to the public at large. Because if you can do that, you will cause change in society. And that's what we're attempting to do. Before we go on, however, I did want to mention one more thing about the Lodal, the depictions of him, the dog-headed man god of the Aztecs, that matches eyewitness descriptions. Now, the Lodal was always depicted as having backward feet. And in non-stop eyewitness case after eyewitness case, the eyewitness will come forward and say, its legs look backwards. And that is just a byproduct of a canine having evolved biologically to be able to support its weight. The legs do look like they're bending backwards, like they've been appended to the animal backwards. But in fact, just the way it would have to evolve. And so for you to have these ancient depictions of this creature showing the feet backwards, matching these modern day accounts of people that had no idea of ancient Zolotl worship describing the exact same thing, is just too much.
A researcher in your group, David Weatherly, had a dogman encounter while he was driving a truck down the Devil's Highway out there. I know he is a member of your group, but did David ever share the details of that encounter with you?
He has not shared the details of that encounter with me, just because the last time we were interacting in any fashion, it was having to do with a different type of paranormal phenomenon called black-eyed children that he is quite familiar with. And next time I run into him, I will definitely be goading him for the details of it, I can tell you that.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting encounter, to say the least. Your mentor, J.C. Johnson, says whenever you set up camp in the Crypto Four Corners area, you're the main attraction for what he calls the furry ones. He also says that the furry ones will do things to people that camp there to let them know that they're around and watching them. Please tell us more about that.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I know for close-hand experience exactly what he's talking about now.
Uh-oh.
We just recently finished an expedition on a private investigation case out to an extremely remote area in northern New Mexico. Now, this is an area that goes from scrub brush and cactus and beautiful New Mexican desert to where it just hits a 11,000-foot mountain that goes up to alpine forest. It's on Navajo Indian reservation land. There's only one family that inhabit that land. There's about 6 members. They own the grazing lease for that land, and there is no other human activity there. So you can imagine how remote. The roads are barely even graded, and it took a brand new Jeep 4x4 that was trail rated to even get us up the trail to where we were going to set up our investigation. And we responded to this area because the family there had found a 16-inch footprint only 100 yards from one of their homes on the property. And that's always concerning that a creature would come that close. So we set up camp there to try to figure out how many were there and if there was anything we could do to kind of drive them back into the woodland property. And during this investigation, I had a couple of examples of exactly what JC's talking about. And it wasn't, I would say, 5-6 hours after we had pitched camp that we looked over to a tree stump that was just on the edge of camp. That was gigantic tree stump. And there was a coffee can sitting on top of it. Now, this was a tree stump that we had walked by 1,000 times. There was nothing on it. And all of a sudden, this old coffee can appears on top of this tree stump. And we think, that's strange. How did that get there? Very weird. And JC's like, well, if it's a 2-pound coffee can, it probably came from them. And we went over and looked at it, and sure enough, it's a 2-pound coffee can. They don't make them anymore. But back in the old days, they were used for all kinds of stuff. People would keep them and reuse them and reuse them and reuse them. And sure enough, it was a 2-pound coffee can, And we stayed there for a number of nights, and I can tell you one night the family came up and their son, who's a rancher, sitting around the campfire with us, and their family sitting there, the grandma and the daughter and her 2 little babies, and the dad. And the son looks up all of a sudden, he says, you know what, I just saw something walk by the car over there, and we're all standing sitting right there, so it couldn't have been one of us. Huge, looked like a huge figure. So I get my flashlight, and I walk up, and this is probably, I would say, 100 feet from camp. He claimed that he saw a figure walk right in front of one of the Jeeps in camp and kind of go down this rock outcrop. Well, I immediately grabbed my flashlight. I walked over to this rock outcrop, and I began to shine it around, pitch black. And I see something that's about the size of my fist, and it's shining bright red, and it looks like almost like a bicycle reflector. And I'm thinking, what the heck is that? What could that be? And all of a sudden, this thing turns its head, and I realize that it was an eyeball. And I get a glimpse of the other eyeball, and even though it's behind a tree, each eye is on either side of the tree.
Oh, wow.
That's how big this creature was. And it was immediate shock. I didn't know what to think, even though, I know Sasquatch are real, but to see that bright of red eye shine a mere 50 feet from me was quite shocking. No smell, which was interesting. But later that night, all night long, and it ended up just backing out and dipping down behind this rock outcrop, and I didn't see any more eye shine after that. But it got a long, good look at me, which I would say a good 5, 6, 7 seconds. It just sat there and stared at me while I was trying to figure out what I was looking at. And all night long that night, we had nonstop rocks, pine cones, and sticks thrown at our tent. They hit the top of your tent and they go, dink, 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 flop on the ground. All night long. Dink, 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 flop. They just torture you today. You get no sleep at all, And so the next morning you're just tired as can be, and you walk, get out of your tent and look around, and there's all these twigs and pine cones and rocks that they've been tossing at your tent all night long just to mess with you. It's just part of their playful nature, I suppose. But he's right. You don't have to go looking for Sasquatch. They know you're there before you come within 2 miles of them. You're talking about a creature that can see you from a mile away and smell you from 2. They can hear a car approaching from miles and miles away. So you're not going to surprise them at all. And the only way to get an interaction is to provide them with some sort of interesting entertainment that piques their interest enough for them to come in and interact with you. Now, with the Dogmen, that seems totally different. They seem to not care about a human presence other than they want to get rid of it.
That's scary.
Yeah. And, in a high percentage of the cases, I've noticed that the Dogmen were seen feeding on roadkill. That's not something you ever hear about with Sasquatch. And I've often wondered, why would such an adept predator, like an upright walking wolf, want to feed off a roadkill when they would certainly prefer a fresh kill? You know? And I don't know the answer to that, but in a high percentage of the sighting cases, they are seen on the side of the road actually feeding off of roadkill, which I find interesting. Some of the other occult patterns I've been able to pick up on and come across is that in a high percentage of the sightings, for some reason, they have occurred on October 30th or 31st. Now, that's not to imply that these were Halloween hoaxes. In fact, one of those witnesses was a 45-year-old nurse driving down Bray Road on the night of October 31st and got a clear sight of one, and she's quite familiar with the biology of a human and a wolf and any other primates, and said that, you know, the way the mouth opened, the way the eyes looked, it just couldn't have been a person in a costume unless it was a Hollywood quality costume. And you would have to ask yourself, what's somebody doing in a Hollywood quality costume out there trying to perpetrate a hoax for no known payoff?
Yeah, that sounds like a good way to get shot.
Yeah, sure does. Or get run over. Come across the wrong cowboy, he's going to hit you with the truck, and you ran out there, which is very, very interesting to me. Now, in some of the cases, including a very hair-raising case in Selma, Alabama, the eyewitness was able to get off a couple of gunshots. In the case of the gentleman in Selma, Alabama, he was in a boat fishing in his favorite fishing spot, which is pretty remote. Selma, Alabama, by the way, is where Edgar Casey was born. Find that interesting. But he was fishing in his favorite spot, had a dog with him, which is a very large pit bull on the boat. And he's about 12 feet from shore. And he swears that he began to hear a noise and that a wolf man, dog man, appeared out of the brush and ran down the embankment into the water at him, charging this guy. You could see the drool coming out of its mouth. He said this thing was in kill mode. Even with a pit bull on the boat, this thing waded off into the water, and it only paused when he turned on the boat engine. And he had a 9mm gun on the boat, and he took it out and claimed to have fired a number of shots into the back of the creature, and it seemed to have been unaffected. Now, in that kind of a heightened state of emergency, it's possible that you could squeeze off a bunch of rounds and not hit your target. That's entirely possible, even at that close range. But if he did hit it and didn't react, then that's something that's pretty concerning if you're talking about a true biological creature.
The fact that it would charge his boat like that when he had a huge pit bull on the boat, number one. Number two, if it saw that he was armed, although it probably had no clue what a gun was, but for it to be so bold to continue its attack like that, that's pretty creepy.
Yeah, very, very creepy, and to me shows at least the possibility that they could be a real threat to any human being in the woods. And, you know, I find that very concerning. Now there are, you know, we have a tally sheet going that is our tally sheet between trying to decide whether these things are biological in nature or ethereal, spiritual in nature. And there's a few interesting things, you know. For once, on the biological argument side, they leave footprints. They leave wounds on victims. We know that from the jogger in Ontario who had his hip gashed by one. They are seen eating other animals. There are multiple sightings where they are spotted with offspring, indicating that they are breeding. And they always seem to appear in areas where it's suitable for them to dwell, i.e. areas that are near these wilderness areas. The one thing in that entire pattern where you have an Indian presence, cornfields, a surrounding forest area, and water, it's like one of those puzzles. You know, which one of these is not like the others? And when you look at that, the one thing that stands out that's not like the others is the cornfield. And it's interesting that corn doesn't grow wild, that it has to be tended by human hands. And it almost seems like the Dogman phenomenon and the cornfields go hand in hand. And the one way you can connect those two things together is through this Aztec connection. These people that worshipped corn, their number one deity was the corn god, and their number one goddess was the corn goddess, and Zolotl was one of their underlings. So, but for corn to show up time and time again in eyewitness sightings, for it to have this Native American connection, for it to be connected to a people who worshipped a dog-headed man god and worshipped corn, all is pointing us in the same direction. That's where we stand really right now on the mystery. As we continue to examine each and every eyewitness account over and over again, pulling out ever more detail and trying to make ever more connections. In time, I believe that will give us a much wider picture of what's going on here. And more importantly, how to prove it to the rest of society, because in the end, that's really what it's all about. There's some other occult connections, but I believe those connections came far after the original modern-day sighting accounts occurred. For instance, there was a group of Satanists apparently operating out of a farmhouse near Bray Road, where a number of these sightings took place. And at that same time, the sheriff in the Lynn County area was discovering dozens of canine bodies that had either been decapitated or their hearts removed. And it is claimed by some of the locals there that this group was trying to conjure a werewolf to do their bidding. But you have to realize that this was years and years and years after those original sightings. So I don't think that that's really connected. But you have to take all of that information into account. There was one eyewitness that was apparently threatened by an unknown person, individual, hinting that they were part of some group desiring secrecy, but you have to take that with kind of a grain of salt, considering all of the historical sightings and information that seem to be pointing us in a different direction. Now, there's one interesting area that your listeners probably have never heard of, and that's called Twilight language. And the world's greatest cryptozoologist, or the most celebrated cryptozoologist, I think probably J.C. Johnson's the greatest, but Loren Coleman's been able to get quite a bit of attention through the years for his site, cryptomundo.com, and he published a book called Mysterious America, wherein he talks about so-called Twilight language. And this was first discussed in a book called The Rebirth of Pan. But it appears that there are certain place names and family names where over and over again there are paranormal activity seem to be related to those names. The most prominent of those place names that seems to be related to paranormal activity is the name Lafayette. Now the author of The Rebirth of Pan says that's because the word Lafayette has the French word fay in it, which means fairy. And that's something Loren Coleman also mentions, that in non-stop areas that have the name Lafayette, you also have very strange cryptid animal sightings. Well, the township where Bray Road is located is the township of Lafayette. And I find that very interesting because there are a number of other cryptids that are also reported in that area. So, the Twilight language is also something that is pointing us in the direction of this being a very, very paranormal-like phenomenon.
It's a tangled web.
It is. It is. It's like a rabbit hole. The further you go down, the deeper and darker it seems to get. But I do believe that we are on the correct path, because there's just too many coincidences, especially with Zolotl, the early accounts, especially from Mark Shackelford, who I believe to be one of the best accounts. His account is so good because all of the elements of his account are elements that end up turning up in all of these accounts going down through history, and these are people that had no knowledge of his account. So he was the security guard who had the creature speak the word Kudara. Translated from Spanish, it means stay. The creature was literally saying, stay, don't follow me or you're going to get hurt. Which to me adds credence to his entire account, because he didn't even understand what the creature was saying. And then for it to turn out to be this ancient Spanish word and to have this Aztec connection, we believe is something that's phenomenal discoveries go. I can tell you this and pretty much finish up with what I have to tell you is that recently I was able to examine frame by frame a film that was sent into the Rocky Mountain Sasquatch Organization. They subsequently published the film, posted the film onto YouTube. I was able to get that film and then examine it frame by frame. And about 3 minutes and 14 seconds into the film, I noticed something really strange. Now, the witness who sent in this film went to this location to film the area because there had been a recent Sasquatch sighting in this area. It's called the Lost Creek Wilderness area, and it's not very far from my home. And so he went with another researcher to just get some film footage of this area where the sighting took place. And while he was there, he kind of noticed a black spot out in the forest. But he was using a pretty low-quality camera, and although in the film he tries to zoom into it, you can tell he's not seeing anything. It just looks like a black spot. And on the film, the original film, it just kind of looks like a black spot. But when you take it frame by frame, and you stop it right there on where the black spot is, and then you use techniques to zoom in and clarify that spot, I was able to basically isolate what I believe to be just amazing photographs of a dogman. Now, this dogman had to be standing, I would say, 9 to 10 feet tall. Most of the sighting reports are anywhere from 6 to 8 feet. So I'm not sure if perhaps he was only in the 6 to 8 feet range, and I'm just overestimating the height. But the face is something that is just shocking in the extreme. Now, I've posted these pictures on the Dogman Encounters page and the Dogman Mysteries group page, but I will be posting them in large along with a very in-depth article pretty soon on the Paranormal Intelligence Agency.com website.
Really good work on discovering that in the picture. That couldn't have been easy to do.
Oh, it was a real pain. Slowing it down frame by frame, and then I could kind of make out, a little something. I was like, I wonder what that is right there. And was able to lighten the picture, zoom in on it, clarify it, zoom in, and when I zoomed all the way in, clearly what you have is a figure with a dog snout. It is clearly looking towards the direction of the man with the camera. It has high pointed ears on either side. One of the ears is actually behind foliage and the other one isn't. And I was able to show from subsequent frames from that point it actually turning its head and opening its mouth. So I have both of those close-ups where you can see a different angle of the head as it turned its head, and then a different angle where it slightly opened its lips and then reclosed them again. So this to me had to be absolute proof of Dogman, because this was a video where the witness himself and even the organization he sent it into had absolutely no idea of what they caught. And they still don't. I'm still actually in the process of contacting that witness to let them know what they caught, because they had no idea. So this wasn't somebody trying to hoax anything. This was me zeroing in on a few frames of shadow in somebody else's film and able to pull out the face of a dogman. That is truly shocking. It really is. In one picture, you can almost see the iris of the left eye. It's that clear.
It'll be really interesting to see how he reacts when he finds out what he really did have on film.
Absolutely, and you have to realize that a lot of people in the Sasquatch community don't believe in Dogmen. They believe that these are misidentified Sasquatch. I mean, after all, it is hard enough to believe in one unproven apex predator out there in the wilds of North America, but now it appears we have two, and that's a lot for some of them to swallow. But not for me, after all, Sasquatch can exist, anything can.
That's true.
Yeah, and apparently does, because the Dogmen are real. And if any of your listeners are planning on going out to the woods, I would highly suggest that you do like me and JC and the rest of the Crypto Four Corners group and the Paranormal Intelligence Agency group and arm yourself. Don't think for a second that these sightings are pretend and these people are crazy, because they're not. So I would keep that in mind.
I wondered about that if JC went out there. He always seemed to be so comfortable talking about cryptids like dogmen. I always wondered if he did feel the need to arm himself when he went out there. He always impressed me as the type of guy to, if he stepped out of the bush and found himself face to face with a dogman, he almost impressed me as the type of guy that would be so calm, cool, and collected that he would just extend a hand out for a handshake.
That's JC exactly. He would, and he'd sit down and share the campfire with it. But if it made one move towards him or anybody else in the team, he'd blow its head right off. That's kind of how we are. We do have a rule out in the bush there, and that is armed at all times. There's no sense in going out and getting yourself hurt in one of these extremely remote areas, because these areas we go to are so remote that the likelihood of you getting medical attention in time is pretty low. So we err on the side of caution, and we do carry weaponry that would allow us to put down a very large animal should that become necessary. With the Sasquatches, we don't shoot on sight or anything like that. They are furry people. We are attempting to get irrefutable video proof of them, and we have an area now that we believe we're going to be able to do that in the area I described on the Navajo reservation, which we'll be returning to time and again. But yes, very much so. We recommend, if you're going to go into the woods these days, arm yourself. There are things out there that you never could believe existed and that are lurking in the shadows of the wilds of North America.
Words of wisdom. Well, Jack, I really appreciate you coming on so much. Do you have any closing points you'd like to make before we close the show?
You know, the one closing point I would like to make is a quote from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. When you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, has to be the truth. And what we're attempting to do is eliminate the impossible so that we can discover the truth and bring it to the public.
Good words, Jack. Really good words. Well, thanks again so much for your time and sharing all that good information with us.
Hey, I appreciate it, Vic. Anytime.
Well, you have yourself a great night.
All right, you too. Thank you so much.
Will do. Don't be a stranger. We'll talk to you later.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks.